Welcome to the Electric Wire Podcast. We bring you news and views on the most pressing issues facing Wisconsin's electric industry, from policymakers, executives, and customer and environmental advocates. Bringing you these discussions, we are the Customers First Coalition. Here's your host, Executive Director Kristen Jilks.
Welcome to the Electric Wire. It's an honor to bring you this episode highlighting some of the top moments on the podcast here at Customers First from 2025. First, we'll share snippets from our May Power Breakfast, which examined the intersection of data centers and energy use. After our Power Breakfast highlights, I'll introduce you to some clips from each of the 5 other episodes that we shared this year. These clips will help you get a high-level overview of the conversation, and we hope you'll use the links in the show notes to go back and revisit this year's episodes in greater depth if you're curious to hear more. The episodes you'll be introduced to in this episode include the following: Public Power Innovation inside Manitowoc Public Utilities Refuel Renewable Project, the true cost of electric deregulation with the organization Power for Tomorrow, Power Check, insights on Wisconsin's energy reliability, staying connected with Representative Adam Nealon, and Good Energy and the Power of the People with Representative Supreme Moore Omakunde. First, we'll hear short clips from a few of our esteemed speakers at this year's Power Breakfast, with audio provided by Wisconsin Eye. Shout out to Wisconsin Eye for helping cover these important events through the years, and we're wishing Wisconsin Eye the best moving forward. You'll hear key messages here from the following speakers in this order: Public Service Commission of Wisconsin Chairperson Summer Strand, Tyler Hebner, Google, Bert Garvin, WEC Energy Group, Commissioner Christy Nieto, Terrell Zeke, Xcel Energy, Delaney Brewer, Frederickson Law, Tom Content, Citizens Utility Board, and Representative Scott Krug of Nakusa.
As you're well aware, the energy industry is currently experiencing a period of enormous evolution. One of the driving forces behind this evolution is also one of the biggest challenges the industry is facing. For the first time in decades, energy demand is rising. This load growth is primarily attributable to 3 factors: electrification of cars, appliances, equipment, etc., the return of domestic manufacturing, and the rapid expansion of data centers. Focusing on our topic du jour, data centers represent exciting economic development opportunities for Wisconsin, attracting new business, bolstering the state's workforce, and advancing innovative technology. Yet, data center proliferation raises a number of important issues and impacts to be discussed throughout the program today. The energy data center nexus often refers to the intersection between the rapid expansion of data centers, particularly with the rise of AI and cloud computing, and the increasing energy demands they place on the grid. In other words, increased demand for AI and cloud computing is driving the need for larger, more energy-intensive data centers, which in turn leads to concerns about reliability, sustainability, impacts on customers and the environment, and more. And that's where all of us in this room come in. Policymakers, utilities, regulators, and a variety of stakeholders need to work together to address the challenges of the data center energy nexus and promote solutions that mitigate potential negative impacts while maximizing the benefits these developments can bring to Wisconsin.
So I talked a little bit about efficiency. Some of the things Google's really trying to work on, kind of bucketed in 3 categories. First is accelerating innovation and investment in advanced energy generation. So we've made commitments and we're looking to build advanced geothermal. We've made commitments around small modular reactors. We're looking at carbon capture. Some of these technologies that are not exactly least cost today, but we want to pull them forward to become hopefully the least cost, clean, firm solutions of tomorrow. Some of the really important aspects to that are kind of continued certainty around tax credits at the federal level and really federal support of some of these emerging technologies. The second big area is optimizing use of the existing grid and unlocking construction of new transmission that's in the public interest. And then the third thing is investing in our labor force. And so just last week, we made an announcement to invest into the Electrical Training Alliance to help support an increase in the electric workforce in the next 5 years. The overall goal of the program is 100,000 new electrical workers and 30,000 new apprentices within 5 years. So So those are some of the big initiatives we have going on at Google around energy.
As the chair mentioned, our electricity demand for the last 20 years was very flat, and now we're seeing levels that we haven't seen in my career at all, going from relatively flat to 4 to 5% annualized growth, and that brings a lot of challenges both for the regulators as well as us as the regulated utility. But there's something happening here. I'm not sure if it's the cold weather or our access to the Great Lakes, or what I think as a policy person, we have a very constructive and balanced regulatory environment compared to some of the other generation markets in the country, but we're seeing a lot of interest in Wisconsin.
So I will say, I think this question is really interesting because it gets to some of the intersection of what I think Chair Strand teed up this morning, that nexus of economic development and then other aspects of the public interest, and a balancing of those so that the end result is no harm to the public. And that's kind of the whole point of economic development as well. It's a public interest goal in and of itself. And hopefully there is a net benefit to customers and to the public of data centers joining Wisconsin utility systems.
We have a lot of access to some of the best low-cost wind resources in the country, solar as well. We see a lot of interest from data centers because of that. And as you can imagine, we have a few data center projects going on. We've been very transparent with our shareholders and disclosed, our pipeline of data centers on our earnings call. Currently, we have upwards of 8 gigawatts of data centers seeking to interconnect across our service territories. For context, every gigawatt of data center is about 1 million residential single-family homes worth of annual electricity consumption. That's 8 million residential customers essentially seeking to interconnect to the grid over a period of time.
My job mainly these days seems to be to help navigate the intersection of two very, very different industries. You have sort of the tech industry, the data centers. It's very fast-paced, it's ever-changing, it's very competitive, and they're not used to a lot of regulation. And they're now taking this energy-first approach because of their energy needs, and they're kind of combining or colliding with the regulated utility industry, which is sort of slow and steady. This is how we've always done it, very risk averse, very heavily regulated. And that intersection has been really interesting and fun to navigate. And I think that's probably why we're all here. I think we're going to see some changes on both sides there.
And so when I think about the data center issue, I think it's one of the looking ahead. This is one of the reasons why we do exist, is to make sure that the customers, the small customers, are protected. And one of the things that we do as a consumer advocate office is we're always in the issue. We're always looking at who pays. It always comes back to who pays. And how do you balance those costs, and how do you ensure those costs are fair?
One of the ideas that actually came up during the task force was working with the WEDC on what at that point were these new concepts of these wide-scale, large-scale data centers, right? And knowing what we had in Wisconsin Rapids as far as availability for power, space, workforce, and all those things trying to come together to figure out what could end up replacing this behemoth that my great-great-grandfather all the way down to my generation worked at over these last 100-some years. So finally, a few years after the mill had closed down, we had this announcement made recently. DPO, one of the big companies that kind of spearheads these projects, said, hey, you've got a really cool concept going on here. You've got some space. You're right next to a hydroelectric dam. How about we create this project where we use not a huge part of the paper mill property, but enough adjacent to the hydroelectric dam that we could use this as a renewable energy resource for a $200 million data center. I was like, okay, thanks for coming, right? So since that announcement was made in, I think, January, maybe February it was, we've seen that project has been dwarfed 5 times over by other projects in the state of Wisconsin. But the saving grace for us, being probably the 5th or 6th biggest announcement being made out there, is that there's more coming, and that rural Wisconsin's on the map.
I hope you found these clips to be insightful and thought-provoking as the discussions around data centers and energy use continue. Our entire Power Breakfast was documented by Wisconsin Eye, and our podcast episode featuring the event was made possible because of Wisconsin Eye's audio. Our next highlight clip comes from the August 1st episode, Power Check, Insights on Wisconsin's Energy Reliability. Guests John Jakey and Scott Smith of Madison Gas and Electric discuss reliability, load growth, and affordability.
When we think about the growth coming from for load, nothing's more significant than data centers right now. And we see that across not only MISO, but across the country right now. And I think it's very important that we as utilities, as well as MISO, as well as regulatory bodies, recognize the fact that these loads come on quickly. And how do you serve that? And how do you plan for that? We have to be very, conscious of ensuring that we have the generation as well as the transmission to be able to serve these in the times that we need. If you think about Wisconsin, I mean, we have an obligation to serve. And these customers come to us, or any customer in that matter. It's the responsibility of us to figure out a way to serve them that's affordable to all of our customers. So I think it's important. It's real. We already see it in Wisconsin and different parts of the state, but it really comes down to planning and to be able to have a diverse generation portfolio to serve those in a reliable and affordable manner.
Yeah, it's really, I think, the combination of utilities working with developers to really understand what their timelines are, what their load profiles are, and then really working with the MISO to make sure that these loads are incorporated into their transmission and capacity planning, just so we kind of have that full picture and are really, kind of developing the system to meet those future demands.
Our next highlight clip comes from an episode I really loved because we featured a national organization with a mission very similar to CFC's, Power for Tomorrow. I chose two separate clips to highlight, where guests Brad Viator and Gary Meltz describe how the organization, Power for Tomorrow, came to be. And the next clip, they describe how energy affordability intersects with regulation in different states.
Before it was created, it was an idea. And Brad and I had worked together, and we worked, on electric utilities and issues around electric utilities. And every few years or every few months, a deregulation fight would come up. And we'd look into what the other side was proposing. And we just couldn't believe that this was going on, and that the government was endorsing a policy that saddled ratepayers with a plan that charges them more, almost 100% of the time eventually, for electricity than if they just stuck with the incumbent regulated utility. And it was literally like, we dive into it, we write op-eds, we do white papers, and you couldn't believe this was going on. And we couldn't believe the other people on the side of the debate were defending this. And what we had ultimately, realized was it was consistently the people least able to afford higher electric bills were paying higher electric bills under deregulation. And we thought something needed to be done. And this was an idea that we said, we need to start a group or something. And then Winter Storm Uri came. And what happened in Texas, which was a deregulated system, failed and left millions of people without electricity for days, causing billions of dollars in economic damage, and more importantly, had killed hundreds of people. A lot of people lost their lives because they didn't have electricity because the system failed. And it was sort of everything, in addition to the consumer side of paying more for electricity, the failures of of a deregulated market. It was sort of everything we were saying as well were proven true. And out of that, Power for Tomorrow sprung. And our first sort of foray into this was in Virginia. And then, I'll let Brad talk about a little bit what happened in Virginia and what we did, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Gary. Kristen, if that's cool, I'll pick up. Brad
Yeah.
Viator. I'm one of Gary's board members at Power for Tomorrow and kind of work more on some of the policy issues. So we launched the group in Virginia because they were having a discussion about deregulation.
I
And
remember that. This is 2021 time frame?
2021. Yeah, 2021, they're having a discussion, and then Winter Storm Uri happens on February 15th. Hundreds of people die, all this damage out there. And we're like, let's go. Let's just tell the story about the Texas dumpster fire in this place that is literally like the lobbyists from the IPPs the week before were saying, bring Texas style deregulation to Virginia. And we're like, all right, well, this is our chance. Let's really jump into this fight and tell the story about why it's so broken and why it's so wrong. So we did that in 2021. We did a couple of sort of studies about like why the cost of electricity is higher in the deregulated marketplaces. And we've really just kind of focused attention telling this story in two different places. There are a couple of states right now, and really over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, that have considered deregulation. So we tell the story in those states. Hey, here's what you're giving up. These are the costs that you're going to be looking at. We kind of jump into those marketplaces and tell that and focus on establishing credibility there. And then we work with the other states that are presently deregulated and are considering re-regulating. Fantastic example of this was Senate Bill 1, which passed in Maryland last year, which eliminated, for all intents and purposes, retail competition. And that was driven by consumer advocates that are allies of ours. And they were like, look, this thing sucks and it costs people a whole heck of a lot of money. And, poor people are the ones that are bearing the brunt of it. So that bill's there. And then there's been a bill in Massachusetts that was championed by the governor back when she was attorney general that does kind of the same thing and eliminates it. So we've been working on that, paying attention in Pennsylvania where they're trying to bring in re-regulation. So we're just kind of doing a little bit of whack-a-mole and trying to get as much information out as possible to share these.
And I think what's sort of really cool about what we're doing is that when people get the full story, they realize almost 100% of the time we're right, unless they're paid by the other side. And I think what happened in Maryland with SB1 was so instructive because all SB1 did was say that the retail suppliers could not charge more than the regulated utility. And when that happened, they all left. So if they're going to say in Virginia or Louisiana or any other state that, hey, if you allow retail supply and we can save people money, and then it's like, well, then how come when Maryland said you can't charge more than the regulated utility, you all, were out of there in a New York second? You know what I mean? So I think, that was really instructive. And I think, SB1 should be something that, as Brad mentioned, states that have deregulation, SB1 should be something that they're looking at and strongly considering.
In terms of cost increases, is that happening across the board or is it happening more in deregulated or regulated states? What's driving some of the cost increases in the cost of electricity right now?
So it varies, but I'll kind of go into a little bit of detail to answer it. So it varies from state to state, and we are seeing cost increases across the board. Cost increases in regulated states are driven by increases in equipment, increases in labor. When you're having to sort of make investments in the system, you're socializing those costs across customers, right? Like that is just a thing that happens. But you divide in a cost of service model whatever these assets cost among your customers. And so it's sort of shared in an equitable way. In the deregulated marketplaces, they're not like you're still making investments in the distribution assets and you're still making investments in the transmission assets, which everybody's paying for. But the price of the energy itself and the price of capacity is shooting through the roof because of scarcity. They're not going in and building new natural gas plants that are going to help and solve this problem. So what you're having is people are paying more money for fewer electrons and that price is going up. So we're seeing big spreads there. The real control you get with the sort of regulated model is that the regulators themselves have to ensure that the costs are allocated. Like If Google comes to town and is like, yeah, I want all my power for free, and the price of residential electricity goes up, those regulators are going to have to be the ones that pay the price. So what they do is and this has kind of been the new novel trend, you're creating these customer classes and these rate classes for large customers like data centers so that all the costs to that group of customers are contained within that universe. That is a feature of regulation. That's not a feature that exists in these deregulated marketplaces, because you could allocate the costs of transmission or you could allocate the cost of distribution, but you're not going to be able to allocate those costs of generation. It's just going to be borne on everybody. And I think that's one of the big areas of differentiation.
And I think, one of our first early successes was, when the war broke out in Ukraine and Russia, where natural gas prices surged. And Brad and I put together a study, the Wall Street Journal covered it, and basically said, okay, if you live in a deregulated state, here's natural gas prices and here's your electric bill. And then what we saw was the regulated states, the regulators protected the customers from those spikes. So, I think that's, worth mentioning.
Our most recent episode of the podcast featured a discussion with Troy Adams of Manitowoc Public Utilities and Tyler Vorpagel of Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin. There are 2 clips included next, one with Troy giving an overview of the refueling project they undertook, and another short clip describing some of the myths they busted around the project. So, Troy, let's start with an overview. What is the Refuel Renewable Project and how did it come about?
Really, it was driven by economics and the electric grid, the market. We have been a generating utility since the beginning, and we currently have 2 CFB boilers that make up about 80% of our generation need. And we also have a combustion turbine, and we've got a small solar garden as well. But the CFB boilers were burning solid fossil fuel, and it was not economic. We were being dispatched mostly for voltage support along the lakeshore. I mean, we actually provide voltage support from Fond du Lac all the way up to Green Bay. So they use our generation, MISO, the grid uses our generation just to make sure they're maintaining voltage when there is a big draw, like when it was really cold this weekend, we were running. But as new transmission projects were brought online, a new generation was brought online, and just kind of pricing of the market, we could see the writing on the wall that our units weren't going to be relevant unless we looked at how they were dispatched. And so around the time when I got here, there was a pretty big fear in the utility that we were going to have to decommission our power plants. And so there's a choice. What are we going to do? Do we build something new? Do we build a natural gas plant like what seemed like everybody else was doing? Do we go for all renewables? Well, our generation was already here. It wasn't that old. The 2 units that we have, the bigger of the 2 was brought online in the mid-2000s, and the smaller one was brought online in the mid-90s. And in the life cycle of a power plant, they've got another 20 plus years that they could run, and probably longer if you take care of them, reinvest in them because you want to extend the life. So they're assets that still have value. And we took the approach, how do we extend the asset life to deliver value back to our community, since our community is paid for those generating units? So we started talking about why are these units not economic? Well, the fossil fuel pricing was part of that, the market, the volatility. What do we need to do to get them economic? So that was a more complicated discussion, because this refueling that we were doing, we're taking pellets, like what you'd use for a wood stove, for a smoker, wood pellets. We're using something similar to that as a supplemental material. And we had been using that in these boilers since the 90s. Since these boilers were first brought online, we had been getting a small amount of this pelletized fuel to maybe 10%. And at one time early on, we tried to ramp up and use a higher level of that, and the units had a problem. Everybody at the utility walked away from that saying, well, this doesn't work. They never really looked for the root cause. It wasn't worth chasing because the units were being dispatched anyway. So when we start talking about what could we do differently to try and make the units economic, we revisited that fuel and talked about using more. So what the fuel is, there are a couple of companies locally, Green Bay and Appleton, that got this recipe, this fuel, engineered fuel blend, approved through the state. And they look, you're showing an example there that
anybody who's watching online, there's a example of what the fuel pellets might look like.
Yeah, so it's waste, it's clean industrial waste, secondary non-hazardous waste is what it needs to be to qualify to be pelletized. And these two different companies independently went through a process to get those recognized by the state as renewable fuel, because that material, if it were not being engineered, made into a pellet, it was going to the landfill. So it was an opportunity to take a waste stream and turn it into a fuel. So we started looking at that a little bit more. The fuel itself is cheaper than what we were paying for pet coke or coal. But the biggest difference for us with refueling and making our two units economic is that we don't need limestone to capture sulfur, which was a really, really big expense in the combustion process, the scrubbing of sulfur. Eliminating limestone, which almost was at a truck ton for ton ratio to coal and petcoke that we were putting in limestone to capture sulfur. We then also have to remove from the unit the ash and haul and dispose of, and it was reactive. It reacts with water. And so it's different than just waste taken to a landfill. It had a higher cost to dispose of, so that limestone cost in and out is really the big thing that made our units not economic at the time. We were struggling to get limestone. There aren't that many companies that were making it because of the reduction in coal plants and petcoke burning plants. There was less market for it. So companies that were making limestone suitable for sulfur capture have already transitioned to other markets, making glass, making product for agricultural use. So we were struggling to get good pricing on that, plus the landfill cost. And then the Ukraine war happened. And there was a sudden global change in the fuel market, and coal and petcoke was being shipped across to Europe because of boycotts on natural gas from the Soviet Union. So all of a sudden we couldn't get a train of coal or petcoke. We couldn't find anything. We were struggling to get trucks a little bit here and there, plus the limestone challenges. It became, very urgent.
Yeah.
To find a new solution, and employees that were hesitant to explore this pelletized fuel because of past challenges all of a sudden became really engaged and really eager to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Because it became clear if we didn't do something, the natural state of things, we probably weren't going to be viable and we were going to be moving on to something else. So we found out the root cause of why we had problems with this fuel before. And as it turns out, we brought in the original OEM for both units, and worked through some engineering to figure out why we were having problems. And it actually was because we were doing it, we were trying to switch fuels and use the cheaper pellets, engineered pellets on weekends, and use coal and petcoke during the week. And we're doing this transition. It actually was chemistry related to the rapidness of a transition, and temperature changes that was causing the problem. And when we switched to just use pellets and run 100% on pellets, and we weren't making those transitions, those problems didn't happen. And we were able to optimize airflow and oxygen within the combustion to really make the units more efficient. We ended up getting 6% more output out of our units after we transitioned to this new renewable fuel and optimized airflows and eliminated all the costs with limestone and ash. We barely have any ash removal now. And so it's like kind of been a game changer for us to work through the engineering of this chemistry problem and figure out how to use this fuel.
As you were doing outreach and talking to the public and talking to officials, what would you say the number one myth you had to dispel was, or what were some of the common questions?
I thought that the environmental impact and concerns would be the highest priority for people, and I'm not at all saying it's not. Equal to that was price. And I guess looking back at Manitowoc, where we had lost industry before and jobs, people didn't want to see a big change that resulted in higher electric prices that would drive away jobs. So yes, the environmental benefits, great. Also, don't mess up the rates. That was clear. So I expected environmental to be the top priority, and it ended up being more equal with rates.
Our final two clips are relatively short ones from two legislative guests who we were honored to host this year. First, we have a clip from Representative Adam Nealon describing what his constituents talked to him about on energy issues.
Mostly my interaction with constituents on energy issues are twofold. One is if there's like people complaining about like rates or the cost, the increases, or general like power outage type things, like being aware of like being made aware of different like issues on the grid and things. But it's interesting because it's like, as important as this issue is, it's not a conversation that is really happens amongst like friends and neighbors in terms of like the future of energy or clean energy, or is nuclear, part of the solution, right? It's just, it tends to be like something that people are impacted by, and they're very aware of how important it is, but just don't feel as comfortable speaking with any authority on it. And they just want to know, they just want to trust that their power is going to go on when they flip a light switch, right? They want us to do everything we can to try to control costs from getting out of control, and want to be able to make sure that there's some certainty in the lights turning on, but outside of that, there's not a ton. I mean, we do have, I will say that one of the things that's emerging in our neighborhoods, like that I'm hearing from people, is like the emergence of like people knocking on their door and trying to sell them solar panels, like even though like third party financing is not really a thing here, like we still have companies going into neighborhoods, knocking on doors and trying to sign them up for their solar companies plan, right? So that's been an interesting wrinkle in kind of the energy discussion. I know they've gone through our neighborhood, they've gone through a couple of neighborhoods in my district, and people are curious about that and learning more, and like, is this allowed? Like what's going on here?
Our final clip includes our honorable guest, Representative Supreme Moore Omokunde. Representative Moore Omokunde had one of my favorite responses to our All the Power question this year, and you can hear it here now.
Well, thank you so much for that, Representative. And I wanted to ask a question that we ask all of our guests, and that is, if you had all the power in the industry, what would you do with it?
Well, I kind of reject the premise, because I think all the power in one hand, it's kind of counterproductive. And so that's why we have the people, and that's why we have elections, and that's why We have consortiums of people. Little to nothing is ever done by one individual alone. It always takes a group of people. So I'll just start off by saying that. However, if things were going my way, well, one, just in the industry itself, I guess we would already have this plan. It wouldn't be no need for this plan because it'd already be in place, and we'd be working on exactly what it is that we do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. My office, we're completely sold out on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and getting to net zero by 2050 and getting to below 52% by 2030. I think one of the things that I would do is to repeal the uniformity clause in the state constitution, because that allows us to look at how we deal with taxing of homes and property taxes in a different way. So we can do things like homeowner heritage and things of that nature. That would be one of the things that I would do. We would be manufacturing batteries and storage units for our solar panels and for our solar panels on homes in the state of Wisconsin, so that we could store the energy and use them for those cloudy or rainier days, and we would be able to use less energy that way. We also need to shore up our 10th Amendment rights in the state of Wisconsin to ensure that we're doing a lot of the things that we need to do in the state of Wisconsin. Because one of the major aspects of the Climate and Accountability Act is that it's a state program. It's a state plan. Because even in larger plans, if you want to talk about the Green New Deal, et cetera, from the federal government, it was always, this is a state, this needs to be done at the state. And the Climate Accountability Act is something that's done at the state, and is a state responsibility, and it is a state level plan. And so I would want to make sure that we're shoring up the 10th Amendment to make sure that states can do what they need to do to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions and are not negatively affected by any unsurety that's happening at the federal government. But we would also continue the work that was done during the Biden administration with the Inflation Reduction Act, and making sure that we can, have those heat pumps in homes, and that we can do those rebates for some of our residents, and do the kinds of things like focus on energy package and on-bill financing, and doing the kind of work that's insulation and things of that nature in homes to help us to lower our energy costs and lower our greenhouse gas emissions as a whole.
Thank you so much for that, Representative. I always love it when people have a different take on that question, and it helped me think about it in a different way than I had before as well. So appreciate that very thorough answer as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone, for engaging with Customers First this year, and we look forward to continuing these discussions in 2026. Happy New Year.
Thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in. Please support our work. You can subscribe to the Electric Wire podcast if you haven't already, and you can follow us on Twitter at The Electric Wire. Thanks also to the members of the Customers First Coalition for supporting this podcast. Our members are Dairyland Power Cooperative, Madison Gas and Electric, the Municipal Electric Utilities of Wisconsin, WPPI Energy, the Citizens Utility Board, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Local 2150, and the Wisconsin Electric Cooperatives Association. Thanks again for listening. We'll have a new episode next month.